I was born in Idaho, and I had a marvelous family, really an amazing family.
Where in Idaho?
Where in Idaho? I was born in St. Luke's Hospital in Boise, Idaho. And my family was very diverse and enormously literate, all of them. Very interesting people. My father's father was an Episcopal missionary who came from Culpeper, Virginia, and at the turn of the century. And he came alone carrying a birch bark canoe. And I don't exactly know how he met my grandmother. She was from Quebec, and I know they met in the West. She actually came from a family that had something to do with starting the Tribune here in Salt Lake City, and they were married in Salt Lake City. But that family was into exploring the western part of the country as well, and they lived for the first quarter of the century in tents and lodges in Montana and Idaho, and Arcata, California, for some unknown reason. I can't figure out how they got that far, but they went everywhere. They went in pack trains and in boats. I have wonderful photographs of them because my grandmother was a journalist and a photographer, and she and her sister Elizabeth took photographs for stereopticons and for newspapers in the early part of the century. I have a great picture of my great-grandmother and three of the sisters. My grandmother's in it because she took the photograph. And all of them in Stanley Basin, Idaho, there's not anyone for 500 miles in any direction, but they are all dressed to the nines with hats and gloves. And there's a baby carriage sitting there in the midst of all that wilderness. And I thought, what could have possessed him to dress like that in this wild place? And my mother's father came from Ironton, Ohio. He was very Irish. His name was James Madison Kelly. And he was an adventurer. He fought in the Spanish-American War. He went to Alaska in the Gold Rush. And his wife was a Methodist from West Virginia. She was a head nurse at the Christ Hospital there. Not too many years ago, when I went to sing at the Mountain Stage concert stage in West Virginia, a whole lot of people I didn't even know existed showed up with many photographs of my grandmother when she was a young woman and a nurse, with her hair all piled up in 3 tiers and a little absurd 20 times folded nurse's cap on top of the whole arrangement. And I just love that. I didn't know those people were there. And in any case, they all ended up being in Idaho. My mother's family had a self-sufficient farm in Twin Falls, which we all know is an oxymoron. And my grandmother and grandfather bought this piece of land, which I now live on. The year I was born, I'm 71, and I live in a handmade cabin that my father cut all the logs for and made all the bricks for. And I have a really great continuum through this family. All of the music that I know from my family came from living. I never thought of it as being anything except part of life. And I actually know how to make butter in a churn, and like Jean Ritchie, I knew the little come butter come butter come. I knew how to make everything. We didn't have any money, so we had to know how to make everything. And before I went to school, I think I knew 12 mythologies because my mother and my father thought that was important. And I knew how to read, thank God, before I went to school, or they would have probably ruined my ability to read. But by suggesting that I read something about Dick and Jane instead of Harun al-Rashid, who I was very attracted to. And so I had all of that music in me before I began to listen to Burl Ives. You know, Burl Ives was a favorite of my mother and father, Joseph Murray and Miranda. We listened to that, but we also listened to Bidou Sayao and Yusuf Bierling. We listened to everything. I wanted to be an opera singer. I didn't want to be a folk singer. I never had the equipment to be an opera singer, but I can still sing part of the prologue to Pagliacci because my father sang it all the time, and I have no idea what it means, but I know. Un nido di memorie in fondo l'anima tre verso un giorno. How could you forget that? And we sang art songs, we sang every kind of song. And I got read to or sung to every night of my life. Everyone loved Shakespeare, everyone loved Edgar Guest. You know, it's just sort of this amazing hodgepodge of stuff went into my head. Bruce Phillips once said my head was like an attic. Everything's in there, but you can't find it. Unless you really dig. And it would be impossible for me to put into a capsule how I got into this, but the main influences were, I married way too young and had 5 children, and came to Salt Lake when my husband who worked for the telephone company, was transferred here, and I got into the extension division. I took a class. I played the ukulele then. So did Bruce Phillips. When we met, we both played the ukulele. We played it, little one, and I played an alto. And we used to get together and with a whole lot of other people and sing everything. And he made up calypso songs. He'd kill me if I sang you those, but I still remember them. And the name of the little coffee house was The Abyss. It was under the Capitol Theater. And it was closed for a while by a sheriff who thought it was too dark in there, and there were too many weird-looking people who looked like something called beatniks that were appearing. And when it opened again, they couldn't figure out what to call it. I suggested Son of Abyss, but they were. In any case, I began to take a class called folk songs, accompaniment or something like that. And Dean Harold Bentley, he really was one of the great savers of my life. He bought me a guitar, a real guitar. It was a favela, and you could actually hold the strings down. In the guitar classes, he believed that if everyone in the world played the guitar, there would be no more war, pestilence, or famine, or any unpleasantness at all. And eventually I taught that class along with my husband, and we had 4 classes that had at least 20 to 25 students. And then I taught a children's class on Saturday mornings, which I really hated because they thought it should be outside, and the children would bring me birds and worms and interesting bugs. Out of that came this folk music society that we're talking about. But somewhere he gave me, I had no instruction at all. I didn't know how to play the guitar. Still don't really know how to play the guitar. But he gave me lessons with Bill Fowler, who was a marvelous classical guitar player. I don't know if any of you would remember him. He'd study with Segovia, and he used to bring Segovia here. I got to see him 4 times here. And he also brought Charlie Bird, the great jazz guitarist. And I was a jazz freak. That was my drug of choice music-wise then, you know. But I began to hear all of this other stuff, and one summer he brought Waylon Hand from UCLA, and Waylon Hand taught a class called an introduction to American folk music. And he introduced me to the concept of oral transmission, how a song can last for centuries and change all of the characters, the tune, the words, the sex of the protagonist in the song, and still be precisely the same song. And you can see it. And he knew the song he chose to show us this with was The Streets of Laredo. And he had 1,000 versions of this. And he showed us how it started off as the unfortunate rake and brought it up through to the 20th century. And I said, oh, I know one of those. That's the first album I was ever on. It's an album from Folkways called The Unfortunate Rake. It is a fascinating piece of work, and everyone should hear it. It has Ewan McCall and A.L. Lloyd on it, and it has Dave Van Ronk and Margaret Berry on it, and it has Rosalie Sorrels on it.
Even has Jan Brunblad.
It has, and it has Alan Lomax. I mean, it is really wonderful, and it goes up through all of that. And I was so extraordinarily overtaken by this sense of continuum in these songs. And then he sent me to a seminar at UCLA, where he was, he was a professor emeritus there. That's a really great place. They have the best library I've ever seen. And I got to stay 3 weeks, and the personnel who taught at this were Charles Seeger and Bess Lomax Hawes. This was in 1957, I think.
59.
No, it can't be, because I made that album in 58, and it was after I went to that.
Okay, sorry, I'm usually right.
If you want to find it, I have an archive, and you can see all of these things if you want to go there, and it's a really nice place to go. It's the University of California at Santa Cruz in the special collections. And I have all of those things with dates on them.
Good.
But I can't remember them very well. I just know that we moved down here. It might have been 58 when I went to the seminar. It was the year that Shelley was born, and if I sat here and subtracted how old she is from this this date, I'd know. Anyway, John Greenway was there. Charles Seeger, as I said, Herbert Halpert, Bess Hawes, Ed Cray, who was then just a young person who was D.K. Wilgus' assistant. He has just written a marvelous book about Woody Guthrie. I think everybody should read. And my guide was Guy Carawan, who took me all around Los Angeles and introduced me to all the Bud and Trav and Cynthia Gooding and all the people who were then singing in the Ash Grove and all around town. And there were people who came and demonstrated the music they were talking about. Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee came, and it was just, I can't describe to you what it did to me. I just immediately started reading tomes, libraries of Malcolm Laws and Vance Randolph and James Francis Child and all of I was particularly taken by the protest songs, and John Greenway and I became great friends. And I brought a lot of those people up here. When I came back, Dean Bentley made the facilities of the University of Utah available to me. That's how eventually that Intermountain Folk Music Society came to be. But he let me bring people. I never thought I'd go anywhere. I had 5 children, a great big house. I didn't expect to go out of Utah, except for maybe a visit to California, which is close enough. But I brought Guy first. That was interesting. He and Peggy Seeger and a bunch of people had gone to Red China they'd gone to Russia first. Now that was in '58.
Was it?
They'd gone to they'd gone to Russia for an international youth conference, and they were the only country. This was the only country in the United States that, or in the world. The United States was the only country in the world that didn't fund a delegation to that international youth conference, and they were already in trouble when they got there. But then they went to Red China. Red China invited them, and the State Department said you can't go there, or we won't okay your passport for that. And they said, well, the Red Chinese said, well, they don't recognize us anyhow. You don't need a passport. And they went, and they went everywhere in China and took pictures. And so Guy brought 7 hours of pictures and a film about this International Youth Conference. And it was the most amazing stuff I ever saw. And I only got about 7 people to come. Everyone was just undone about it being Red China, so they wouldn't have anything to do with it. It was the least successful thing I ever did in terms of an audience, but it was really an eye-opener. I then brought Gene Ritchie for we put on a small festival, and we got people. I remember getting that man. Oh God, I can't. There's a 10-inch album for Folkways. What was his name? He was from Ogden, and he sang "Zack the Morning Pioneer," and when he whistled, woo woo.
Wasn't that Lester Robert?
Mama'd understand. He's about an engineer who had a wife in every town.
No. Myron Crandall?
No, Fred something.
Fred Keller?
I'm sorry, I can't remember that. It just suddenly popped into my head. I remember him because he, and when he whistled, woo, woo, And some of the other people, there were some kids from BYU who did polygamy dances. There'd be three women and one man. And of course, they were really Swedish dances that had nothing to do with polygamy. They called them polygamy dances. And Austin Fife, I met Austin Fife and Hector Lee and all those people, and we hadn't started that Intermountain Folk Music Society yet. It was just the Folklore Society and the Extension Division were really paying for this, but they allowed us to have, sometimes Kingsbury Hall, if it was somebody really well known, or in the smaller theater in the Round, or the ballroom, and the more we began to see how many people would like to come. People loved coming here, so on the way to everywhere, and they could make some money going from here to there. And I would always put the concerts on Wednesday because I found that anybody would come on Wednesday. They were going to be from Denver to San Francisco, And I began to have big meetings in my house every Friday night, just for us to all sing. And the Utah Valley Boys would come, and everybody would come. And I had hooked up with some very interesting people who had one of the better poetry magazines from the 50s called Wild Dog. It was Gino Sky and Drew Wagnon. So all of those people were coming through town, and I personally think that was one of the things that made it most interesting, was that conjunction between the folk music people and the poets. Charles Olson came, and Edward Dorn started that magazine up in Idaho, at the University of Idaho State University of Pocatello. And these were students of his, and there was this Barry, the theater guy, the theater dance guy. There was
Oh, Barry Lynn.
Barry Lynn.
Yeah.
There was a marvelous underground here of theater, poetry, folk music, and political people, including Ammon Hennessy, and that all came together to make this into one of the more interesting places in the United States, underground. And this is a very good university. The people who were in the university all understood how interesting that was, and how important it was that all these people were meeting together through the offices of those very interesting people who were here. It just didn't ever get any publicity. Yesterday I went to a publicity panel, and all the people who paid attention to us were people we simply went and dragged by the hair of the head, kicking and screaming. And I believe when it finally became a thing where we could raise money and bring people that were important to us, like Jean Ritchie. Jean Ritchie really influenced my life. She got me onto the Newport Folk Festival after she met me here. And Waylon was interested in the stuff from my family and the things that I knew, just that I had never thought of as being interesting to anyone. In the South, sometimes they call them those old throwed-away songs. And I just also would say that because it was the 60s when I finally became aware of what I was involved in, there was a generous countrywide connection. Everyone was connected. Everyone knew about each other. There was I think that's what's wrong with everything now, is no one's connected anymore. Everybody's afraid of each other. And at that time, there was a possibility, a window where everyone connected. And I was able to be a part of that. I was the person who did that. Now, when I became a professional, it's because I left my husband and I had to support 5 children, and I didn't know how to do anything, and that's why I became a folk singer. I do not think of myself as a folk singer. I'm a storyteller who uses music to advance the story. I'm a troubadour. I brought the news from one person to another. We all did. And that's what my story is.
Thanks, Rosalie.